Imagine if I could sing like Moshe Storch. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Could do that. Oh, then I messed it up. Lots of technical malfunctions today, but getting through it. Okay. Yehud in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Gail in Kansas City, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Belle in Texas, Yosef in Sierra Nevada, Frank in San Pedro, Ohio in Florida, Moishi in Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. And Lorraine in Texas. Okay, our daf tonight is page 34 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud. We got a little bit of a head start on page 34 yesterday, so we're good way, about halfway down 34a. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 3. And here we have, as we've seen, there's so many problems that could disqualify an offering. But here in chapter 3, okay, but if an offering, something went wrong, is it a permanent error, a totally disqualifying error, or can it be ameliorated? Sometimes it can. So let's continue. It was stated in the case of one who offers up the limbs of a non-kosher animal upon the altar. The offerings, the animals that were brought as offerings, what were they? They were generally sheep, goats, or cows, cattle, oxen, and then of course there were bird offerings as well, which were generally doves or pigeons. Were they offering lions and tigers and bears on the altar? Absolutely not. Those are not kosher animals. The animals that were brought as offerings absolutely had to be kosher animals. So what happens if somehow a non-kosher animal is brought as a sacrifice on the altar? Again, this is when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, which it hasn't been in almost 2,000 years. So it was stated in the case of one who offers up the limbs of a non-kosher animal upon the altar, Reish Lakish says he is flogged for doing so, presumably if he did it intentionally, otherwise flogging wouldn't apply, while Rabbi Yochanan says he is not flogged. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that he's so far off that you can't even call this an offering, so flogging would not apply. Let's see if that's basically what's happening. The Gemara explains the logic for each opinion. Reish Lakish says that he is flogged because there is a positive mitzvah to sacrifice an offering from the herd and the flock. The herd is cattle, the flock are sheep and goats. We learned that in Leviticus 1, verse 2. So these are kosher animals. Therefore, it can be inferred that a kosher animal, yes, one may sacrifice, but a non-kosher animal, one may not sacrifice. And one who transgresses a prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah is flogged for it. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, one is not flogged for it, as one who transgresses a prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah is not flogged for it. General rule is that flogging, when flogging was applied, again, that also hasn't happened in probably 2,000 years, but when flogging was applied by a Beis Din, by a rabbinic court, it would be for the intentional transgression of a negative mitzvah. Thou shalt not do such and such, and the person did it. Usually with positive mitzvahs, if you neglected to do it, okay, well then the correction for that is to go and do it, right? And that's why flogging usually doesn't apply. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah raises an objection to the opinion of Reish Lakish from a baraisa cited in Torah's Kohanim. Quote, whatsoever parts the hoof and is wholly cloven-footed and chews the cud among the beasts, that you may eat. Okay, that's Leviticus 11:3 telling us what are the kosher animals. And from this one can infer, but you may not eat a non-kosher animal. And a prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah has the status of a positive mitzvah. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, I will explain it to you. With regard to one who sacrifices the limbs of a non-kosher animal upon the altar, everyone agrees that he is not flogged, as he violates only a positive mitzvah. When they disagree, it is with regard to one who sacrifices a kosher, undomesticated animal on the altar, and it was stated like this. Rabbi Yochanan says he transgresses a positive mitzvah. Reish Lakish says he does not transgress anything. So the Gemara explains their reasoning. Rabbi Yochanan says he transgresses a positive mitzvah, since the Torah commanded that domesticated animals, yes, they can be sacrificed, from which it can be inferred that an undomesticated animal may not be sacrificed, and a prohibition stems from a positive mitzvah. A prohibition that stems from a positive mitzvah has the status of a positive mitzvah, which doesn't lead to flogging. By the way, the difference between domesticated animal, undomesticated animal, wild sheep, wild deer. A deer is a kosher animal, but you can't go hunting and then, kill it with an arrow or with a bullet and then eat it because it wasn't shechted, it wasn't slaughtered properly. But if you could trap the deer and then slaughter it properly, it would be okay for eating. However, it would not be okay for bringing as a sacrifice when the temple is standing. So Rava raised an objection from a Baraisa. Had the verse in Leviticus 1:2 stated only, when any man of you brings an offering to the Lord, animals, behema, I would say that even an undomesticated animal is included in the category of an animal, of a behema, like that which is stated, these are the animals, using the word behema, that you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, and the gazelle, and the fallow deer, and the wild goat, and the oryx, and the aurochs, and the mountain sheep. We see that specifically in the Torah, Deuteronomy 14, verses 4 and 5. And, for example, the deer and the gazelle are, generally speaking, undomesticated animals. Therefore, the verse states, from animals, from the cattle, and from the flock, which indicates that God says, I have told you to bring offerings from the cattle and the flock to the exclusion of an undomesticated animal. Now, one might have thought that one should not bring an undomesticated animal ab initio, right? That's what we just said. But if one did bring it, it is valid. And to what is this comparable? To a student whose teacher says to him, bring me wheat. And the student brought him wheat and barley. In this case, it is not as though the student is disobeying the statement of the teacher. Rather, he is merely adding to his statement, and that should be valid, one might have thought. Therefore, the verse states, from the cattle and from the flock, to reiterate that God is saying, I have told you to bring offerings from the cattle and the flock, but not the undomesticated animal. And to what is this comparable? To a student whose teacher told him, bring me only wheat, and the student brought him wheat and barley. It is not as though the student is adding to the statement of the teacher. Rather, it is as though he is disobeying the statement of the teacher, since the teacher instructed him to bring only wheat. Consequently, one who sacrifices an undomesticated animal does not merely add to a mitzvah of the Torah, but he also violates a prohibition, and the offering is therefore disqualified. And the Gemara concludes, the refutation of the opinion of Reish Lakish is indeed a conclusive refutation. We don't bring undomesticated animals. Now we're on page 34b. Now, let's just go back for a second. What did Reish Lakish say? What he was talking about is being flogged, and he is flogged for doing so. Rabbi Yochanan says he is not flogged. So if we have refuted Reish Lakish, I guess it's because he just didn't bring an offering at all, and that's why it doesn't qualify for flogging. Okay, 34b. The Mishna teaches, and with regard to all of them, in a case where they collected the blood with the intent to offer it beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, right? So if at the time of slaughter or collecting the blood or conveying the blood or sprinkling the blood on the altar, the person doing it had intent to consume some of that meat, for example, of a sin offering or of a peace offering, beyond the permissible time, that would disqualify it immediately from the outset. Okay? So with regard to all of them, in a case where they collected the blood with the intent to offer it beyond its designated time, so here, I guess not eat, but a different kind of mistaken intention to offer it, meaning, I guess, to sprinkle it on the altar, also has to be done by the deadline. And at the time that he's collecting the blood, he has an intent to sprinkle it later beyond the deadline. So does that permanently disqualify the offering? According to our Mishnah here, not quite. So, and with regard to all of them, in a case where they collected the blood with the intent to offer it beyond its designated time or outside its designated area, if there is blood of the soul that remains in the animal, the priest fit for temple service should again collect the blood and sprinkle it on the altar, right? So you get a do-over, but there has to be blood of the soul remaining to collect. And what's blood of the soul, right? That's the blood that spills out when the animal is shechted, when it is slaughtered in the temple. Now, the slaughtering doesn't have to be done by a priest, but it does have to be done with the correct intention. The collecting the blood, conveying it, and sprinkling it has to be done by a priest who is fit for the temple service. So if a mistake was made at the time of collecting the blood, okay, the blood that was collected is no good. You can't sprinkle that blood. But if there's more blood left in the animal that can be collected, then you can do that and sprinkle it on the altar, and we haven't disqualified the offering, which the owner of that sacrifice would be very glad to hear. That is offering, that he brought all the way to Jerusalem and maybe was difficult for him to purchase. It's still valid, and it can complete its journey. Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan if an individual who is unfit for temple service presented the blood. Right, so presenting the blood would be sprinkling it on the altar. Then what is the law with regard to the blood that remains in the animal? Does the fact that he presented some blood and he is unfit render the rest of the blood that could still be collected from the animal a remainder? And a remainder here means of a disqualified offering, and therefore it cannot be brought. Or perhaps the presenting that was performed by an unfit individual is just not considered valid at all, and therefore a priest who is fit for the temple service may present the blood again if there is some remaining blood of the soul that could be collected from the animal. So Rabbi Yochanan said to him, and Rabbi Yochanan said to him, not valid presenting, all right, so let's call it an invalid presenting of the blood, does not render the rest of the blood a remainder, meaning that could not be presented again, unless it is a case where a priest that was fit for temple service presented the blood with intent to offer it beyond its designated time or outside the designated area, which would then render the animal fully disqualified and any blood that's still in it also disqualified. Since it is only in that case that the presenting of the blood effects acceptance, i.e. is considered a valid presenting with regard to rendering the offering pigul, i.e. an offering that was sacrificed with the intent to consume it after its designated time. And Rav Zevachim teaches the matter a little bit differently. He says, Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, concerning a cup of disqualified blood, for example, one which had been taken out of the temple courtyard and was then nevertheless presented on the altar, what is the law with regard to rendering the remaining blood a remainder and therefore unfit to be presented, or blood that is still available to be collected and presented? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, in the case of an unfit individual who himself presented the blood, what do you hold to be the law? if an unfit individual who presented the blood renders the remaining blood a disqualified remainder, then a cup of disqualified blood should also render the remaining blood a disqualified remainder. If an unfit individual does not render the remaining blood a disqualified remainder, then a cup of disqualified blood should also not render the remaining blood a disqualified remainder. Right? So again, just the terms are here very confusing. But the concept is, was the initial presentation of the type whose disqualification is a permanent disqualification of the animal, and therefore any blood that's still in the animal, even if it could be collected, even if there was blood of the soul remaining to be collected, you can't use it? Or was the erroneous presentation of the blood of the kind that could be subject to a do-over and doesn't render the whole animal and any blood within it fully disqualified? That's the question that they keep asking. So Rav Yirmi of Difti teaches the discussion this way. Abaye asked Rav, if the blood was collected in more than one cup, and the presenting of the blood on the corners of the altar was performed with one cup, what is the law? Does the cup render the blood of the other cup rejected, and it is therefore poured into the drain running through the temple courtyard? Or does it render it a remainder which could be poured on the base of the altar? So that's what they mean by remainder. It's after you sprinkle on the altar, what's left in the service vessel gets poured out on the base. That's just a part of the process, but it is not what affects atonement. The sprinkling is what affects atonement. Then what's left of the blood, that is poured out on the base of the altar. If you neglected to pour it out on the base of the altar, that would not disqualify the offering. The atonement has already been done. So Rabbah said to him, this is a dispute between Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the remainder of the blood of the external sin offering in the verse above discussing the sin offering of a Nasi. It states, and he shall pour its blood out at the base of the altar of the burnt offering. And in the verse below, discussing the sin offering of an individual, it states, and he shall pour all its blood out at the base of the altar. And the discrepancy between the first verse and the second verse, which contains the additional term all the blood, is explained as follows. From where is it derived with regard to a sin offering, which the priest collected its blood in 4 cups and placed one placement of blood onto the altar from this cup, and one placement of the blood from that cup, and likewise for all 4 corners of the altar, that the remainder of the blood from all the cups are poured out onto the base of the altar? How do you know that? Because the verse states, and he shall pour all its blood. One might have thought that if he placed 4 placements of blood of the sin offering from one cup, the blood in all the rest of the cups should be poured onto the base of the altar. Therefore, the verse states, and he shall pour its blood, as opposed to all its blood. What does this mean? Only that blood in the cup from which the blood was properly presented on the altar is poured onto the base of the altar, and the rest of the cups are rejected, and they are poured into the temple courtyard drain. So the Baraisa continues that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says, from where is it derived with regard to a sin offering, which the priest collected its blood in 4 cups and then placed 4 placements from one cup, that the blood from all the cups are poured out onto the base of the altar? The verse states, and he shall pour all its blood. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it written, and he shall pour its blood, which indicates that not all the blood is poured out? And Rav Ashi said the verse serves to exclude the remainder that is in the throat of the animal that was never collected in a vessel to be presented, which is not poured onto the base of the altar, but into the temple courtyard drain, along with any other blood that came out when the animal was being cut into pieces. For example, when it's brought up for a burnt offering, they don't just put the carcass of the animal on the altar. They first butcher it somewhat, cut it into pieces and put those up. There's going to be blood that spills out there. That's not blood of the soul. That is not poured out on the altar nor on the base. That is not sprinkled on the altar nor poured on the base of the altar. That just goes down the drain. Okay. New topic. The Mishnah discusses three similar cases. Our Mishnah here in chapter 3. If the priest who is fit for temple service collected the blood in a vessel and gave the vessel to an unfit person, that's not a permanent error, because that person should return it to the fit priest. If the priest, and then he could sprinkle it on the altar. If the priest collected the blood in a vessel in his right hand and he moved it to his left hand, that's not a permanent error. He can take it from his left hand and put it back in his right hand, and the blood is still good and can be sprinkled on the altar. And likewise, if the priest collected the blood in a sacred vessel and then he placed that blood in a non-sacred vessel, not a permanent error. He can pour it back into a sacred vessel and sprinkle on the altar from there. So the Gemara comments, and it was necessary to mention all of these cases, as had the Mishnah taught us only the case where he gave the blood to an unfit individual, I would say, what does the term unfit mean? It means an impure priest who is not completely unfit, as he could participate in a communal service when the majority of the people are tameh, impure with corpse tuma. So then even an impure priest could serve under those circumstances. Otherwise he can't. But he's not completely unfit. Like, for example, if it turns out that his mother was a divorced woman. A priest cannot marry a divorced woman. If he did and had children with her, then his son is a Cohen, but he's a halal. He's disqualified from serving in the temple under any circumstances. But here, one who is impure, there is usually he can't serve, but there is that very unique circumstance when the majority of the population is also impure, and then he could serve. Therefore, what does the term unfit means? It means an impure priest who is not completely unfit, as he is fit for communal service in the temple when the priests or the entire community are impure, and that is why the blood is not disqualified. But if the priest moved the blood to his left hand, which under no circumstances may be used to perform the rite of collecting and carrying the blood, it is no longer valid. And had the Mishnah taught us only with regard to moving the blood from his left hand that he should return it to his right hand and present it, one would assume that the reason is that the left hand has validity on Yom Kippur, since the high priest carries the spoon of incense with his left hand. But if he poured the blood into a non-sacred vessel, then it would not be valid. And had the Mishnah taught us only with regard to a non-sacred vessel that the blood is not disqualified because he can return it to a sacred vessel, one could suggest that perhaps it is because the vessels are suitable to be consecrated, but with regard to these, an unfit individual and the left hand, which have no possibility of becoming fit for service, say that the blood does not remain valid. Therefore, it is necessary for all of those cases to be stated. Now, the Gemara questions the actual halacha. But let the blood be considered rejected when placed in the hand of an unfit individual in the left hand or the non-sacred vessel. Why are you so sure that it can be returned to the right hand or returned to a sacred vessel or returned to a person who is fit? Why not just say, no, it's disqualified? How did the Mishnah come up with that? Well, this is in accordance with the opinion of Hanan the Egyptian, who does not subscribe to the law of rejection, but holds that a sacrifice that was rejected temporarily is not rejected permanently. And this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. Hanan the Egyptian says, in the event that the scapegoat of Yom Kippur was lost, even if the blood of its partner that is sacrificed to God has already been collected in the cup, the blood is not rejected, but rather he brings another scapegoat as its counterpart and pairs it with the goat that has already been slaughtered, and the blood is sprinkled, right? So we have two goats on Yom Kippur. One is sent out into the wilderness to Azazel. One is slaughtered in the temple, and its blood is sprinkled inside, right? Inside the sanctuary and on the curtain and between the staves of the Holy Ark in the Holy of Holies. So they're saying, well, it's a pair of goats. They come as a pair. So what if you lost the scapegoat? Does that mean that the goat that remains to be slaughtered and its blood sprinkled is disqualified? Hanan the Egyptian says, no. You just bring another scapegoat and you can pair it with the original goat. Rav Ashi says that there is another explanation to our Mishnah. Anything that is in his power to rectify is not considered rejected, as in these cases where he can simply return the blood to its proper place. Why should we consider it rejected? The fix is ready at hand. Rav Shaya said it is reasonable to explain the Mishnah in accordance with the opinion of Rav Ashi, as whom have you heard who accepts the reasoning of rejection? It is Rabbi Yehuda. As we learned in the Mishnah in Tractate Yoma 62a, and furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda says, if the blood of the goat sacrificed to God spilled from the cup before it was sprinkled, then the scapegoat is left to die. We can't send it over the cliff for Azazel. Similarly, if the scapegoat died, the blood of the goat sacrificed to God should be spilled, and 2 other goats are used. Consequently, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the scapegoat, or in the opposite case, the blood of the goat to be sacrificed to God, is totally rejected. If you lose one of the 2 goats of the pair, the other one is rejected, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And yet, we have heard that Rabbi Yehuda says anything that is in his power to rectify is not rejected. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda says a priest would fill 1 cup with blood of the many paschal offerings, the Pesachs, right? When the Pesach was brought, when the temple was standing, the Passover offering. A priest would fill 1 cup with blood of many Pesach offerings brought that day that was now mixed together on the floor, and then sprinkle it with a single sprinkling against the base of the altar. And conclude from the Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda holds that although the blood originally spilled from the cup, anything that is in his power to rectify is not rejected. And the Gemara affirms, yes, conclude from it that this is so. New topic. The Gemara discusses the matter itself. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says a priest would fill 1 cup with the mixed blood, so that if one of the cups with the collected blood of one of the Pesach offerings were to spill, it would be found that this cup of the mixed blood that was sprinkled would render the sacrifice valid. Right, this is, you can imagine, a really good policy ruling of the Rabbanim, of the rabbis, when you consider what was going on during Passover, or Erev Pesach, right, the afternoon before Passover began, when the temple was standing, and there were thousands and thousands of these offerings being brought in a short amount of time. They were all moving so fast. There's no question that, spillage happened. And this was a kind of, catch-all to make sure that, every Pesach that was brought, some of its blood, or, some of its blood mixed with other blood, made it to the sprinkling on the altar so that everybody's Pesach was properly qualified for them to go roast it and eat it that night. And the rabbi said to Rabbi Yehuda, but the mixed blood that you're talking about was not collected in a sacred vessel, right? From the blood of the soul coming out of the animal. So the Gemara asks, from where do the rabbis know that the blood was not collected in a vessel? Perhaps it was collected and it spilled out. So rather, this is what they are saying. Perhaps it was not collected in a vessel. Rabbi Yehuda said to them, I too said that the blood should be sprinkled only when it was collected in a vessel. So the Gemara asked, but he, Rabbi Yehuda himself, from where did he know if the blood was indeed collected in a vessel? So the Gemara answers, he relies on the fact that priests are vigilant and perform their service properly and collect all the blood, but they work swiftly, and the blood therefore spills from the cup, but at least it was collected in a cup when the animal was first shechted. We're on page 35a now, getting a bit of a head start on tomorrow's daf. The Gemara asks, but isn't blood of exudate, one who consumes blood of exudate is not liable to receive chorus, but he is flogged if he consumed an olive bulk of food in accordance with the opinion of the first Tana. I guess what we're talking about, blood of exudate. Interesting word, E-X-U-D-A-T-E. I believe what we're talking about is the blood that oozes out, from the wound of the animal, but is not the blood of the soul, meaning, the animal's already dead and some blood keeps oozing out, right? Okay, so the Gemara asks, but isn't blood of exudate, which is unfit to be sprinkled upon the altar, mixed with the blood of the soul on the floor, right? Blood kept oozing out. There's blood everywhere on the afternoon before Passover. So some of that blood that's on the floor is blood of the soul that's spilled out of the service vessels. And some of it is just blood that oozed out after the animal died. Can you mix that kind of post-mortem blood with blood of the soul and sprinkle that on the altar? And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yehuda conforms to his standard line of reasoning as he says that blood of exudate is considered blood. And this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. Blood of exudate is subject to a prohibition, and one who consumes it receives lashes. This is not as severe as consuming blood of the soul, the blood that spurts out of an animal as it is slaughtered, for which one is liable to receive karas. Rabbi Yehuda says one who consumes blood of exudate is liable to receive karas, as this blood is treated as blood. Blood is blood, and the Torah says you shall not consume blood. So the Gemara challenges this answer, but doesn't Rabbi Elazar say that Rabbi Yehuda concedes with regard to atonement that presenting blood of exudate does not affect atonement, as it is stated, for the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by reason of the soul. That's Leviticus 17:11. And this verse indicates that blood with which the soul leaves the animal, i.e. that spurts immediately upon slaughter, this is called blood. But blood with which the soul does not leave the animal, i.e. this blood of exudate, is not called blood. So if so, like legally speaking, so if so, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, blood of exudate is unfit for presenting upon the altar, and collecting blood from the floor should therefore be ineffective, since it is some kind of a mix of blood of the soul and blood of exudate. So rather, Rabbi Yehuda conforms to his line of reasoning as he says, blood does not nullify blood. Therefore, the blood in the cup that is fit for sprinkling on the altar is not nullified by the blood of exudate, and the entire mixture may be sprinkled on the altar. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Now, the Gemara cites the continuation of the Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda said to the rabbis, according to your statement that the mixed blood on the floor may not be used, why do they plug the drain of the temple courtyard on Erev Pesach and not allow the blood to flow out through it? And the rabbi said to him, it is a source of praise for the sons of Aaron, right, the Kohanim, the priests, or the descendants of Aaron, that they should walk in blood up to their ankles, thereby demonstrating their love for the temple service. Right? This is just not the way we normally process information. But in the ancient world, it's not our world. Okay? So first of all, agrarian society. They were quite accustomed to seeing animals slaughtered, to slaughtering it themselves, to raising animals and then slaughtering them and then eating them. And the idea that many, many animals were being slaughtered on the afternoon before Passover begins is a testament to the Jewish people and the priests serving the Jewish people, that so many people made the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem for the holiday, brought their offerings with them, participated in the Pesach, and the natural outcome of that, the natural consequence of so many people participating in those offerings is that there's going to be a lot of blood on the temple floor. Likewise, when Solomon initiated the first temple, and he brought an unbelievable number of offerings, just thousands and thousands and thousands of offerings. Okay, so, to the modern eye and ear, that just sounds, a little bit icky. But what it was, a tremendous love for the Holy One, blessed be He, who said offerings may be brought, this is how they may be brought, and then the people fulfilled the will of the Lord. So, the Gemara challenges, but the blood is an interposition. What do you mean? Why is it a good thing if there's so much blood on the temple floor? The blood is an interposition between the feet of the priests and the blood and the floor of the temple. And this should invalidate the service, as we learned in chapter 2, that the priest has to have his bare feet on the marble floor, on the stone floor of the holy temple. So if there's so much blood there, there's something between his feet and the floor. And the Gemara explains the blood is moist and is therefore not an interposition. As we learned in a Baraisa with regard to blood, ink, honey, and milk, when they are dry, they form an interposition. But when they are moist, they do not interpose. Just like if you immerse in a mikvah for a purification ritual, right, which is just water, if you're wearing a ring, that's an interposition between you and the waters of the mikvah. But the waters themselves do not interpose between you and other waters, right? So liquid is not an interposition. And the Gemara asks further, but don't their garments become soiled? As we learned in a Baraisa, if a priest's garments were soiled and he performed the temple ritual while wearing them, his ritual is disqualified. And if you would say that they raised their garments so that they would stay clean, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa, and the priest shall put on his linen garment, mido vad, in Leviticus 6:3. And the term mido, literally his measure, teaches that his garment must be according to his measure, kemidato. Meaning that it should not be too short and that it should not be too long. So if the priest is raising his garment to keep it above this blood on the floor of the temple, it will no longer be exactly his size. And the Gemara answers that the priest would walk in the blood, only carrying the sacrificial limbs to the ramp of the altar, which is not actually a ritual, but only a preparation for a ritual or for a rite, R-I-T-E. So this is permissible. And the Gemara asks, and is it not one of the rites? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it upon the altar? And this is referring to the carrying of the limbs to the ramp, up the altar. So rather, the priest would walk in the blood only while carrying wood to the arrangement of wood on the altar, which is not a rite. And the Gemara asks, but if the floor of the temple was full of blood, how did they walk to perform the actual rites without soiling their garments, like sprinkling blood on the altar? And the Gemara answers, they would walk on platforms raised above the floor so that the blood would not reach their garments. So we should ask, but don't those platforms interpose between their feet and the temple floor? And it would seem that conveying doesn't require having their feet on the floor. Perhaps when they get to the altar they do, when they collect the blood they do, but that conveying maybe not. I don't know, because that discussion of Mishnah number 1 has just ended. So they don't answer that question. We'll pick it up with Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3 tomorrow. Just a couple of comments. Frank, exudate, fluid that would be like a mass of cells, coagulation, or fluid from inflammation. I guess that's how we define that term now. But here they're using it for that blood that is oozing out after the animal has died. The point being, it's already died, not the initial spurt of blood by which it dies. Thank you, Frank. And Joseph, since the Torah is not exhaustive in the list of all possible kosher and non-kosher animals, but rather appears to give rationale for categories, what if an animal was presented that is neither enumerated in the written or oral Torah? Well, I mean, that question comes up a lot. It's a very important question. And, one of the contexts it comes up in, right, is which fish can we eat? What food from the sea can we eat? Fish with fins and scales, right? And so I believe that there's no such thing. There are fish with fins that do not have scales, but there's no such thing as fish that have scales and don't have fins. And if there would ever be one, it would be a problem for Jewish law, but there never has been. And God could issue commandments, with great confidence because he's God. He knows what's going to happen, past, present, and future. So, what are the kosher animals that we can eat? Right, cloven hoof and choose the cud. And then it lists some animals. I think there definitely are animals that are not specified and that rabbis, since the Gemara and the Torah, have said is kosher, if you slaughtered it in a kosher manner, because there's just so many different species of antelope and gazelle, etc., and deer. Is deer a category? And then there's all these subspecies. I don't really know how this works, but I do believe, I could be wrong. I'm not a rabbi. I'm definitely not a prosecuting rabbi. I'm not a rabbi at all. But I do believe that when it comes to this idea of, a mammal that has the cloven hoof and chews its cud, that's what they go by, and the list is not exhaustive, right? Birds, it's also very interesting, right? There are kosher birds like chicken, duck, geese, and then most birds are not kosher. Now there, I think your question is better, Joseph, because I believe when it comes to birds, we don't have definitions that we can follow. There, we follow the names. And I guess that maybe rabbis are able to derive that, I don't know. I don't really know. But I think like all kinds of duck could be slaughtered, all kinds of geese, all kinds of chicken. But no kinds of predatory birds, no kinds of scavenging birds, no vultures, no crows, no ravens, things like that. But pigeons, yes. I don't know how they come up with the definitions. It's a really good question. I'd have to study that at greater length, and I'm not prepared to give an answer now. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday, at the regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.